All right, should we get started? Let's get
Yeah,
started.
let's go ahead.
And people can join in. Just a quick introduction. Thank you everybody for joining in this morning. This is our first try with Zoom, but it seems to be a pretty good platform. So we're happy about it. A big thank you to Eliane Karsaklian for joining us this morning. She's a frequent speaker for the FACC-Chicago. Always one of our favorite people to talk to us about negotiations, about intercultural communication, and always the person who asked the question about one-on-one and person-to-person interaction. So we thought it would be really interesting to hear from her in this sort of new context of not being able to be physically together, and how do you apply a lot of what of her principles of how people should be communicating to a more virtual world. So I am going to mute myself now so you don't have to listen to my first grader do her morning lesson, and turn it over to Eliane. Thank you very much for being with us this morning.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, girls, for your invitation. Thank you all who are able to attend this webinar. I'm pretty happy to be able to talk about this because this is so timely, and I think that is so important because we don't know how long this pandemic will stick around. So I think it is extremely important. So Molly said it before, but I want to say it again. Whenever I have a question, just please unmute your micro and let me know. So that this can be more interactive. Andrea was just saying that I would rather prefer in-person meetings, and that is very true. I am always the one asking for us to have meetings when we meet in person, because I think that there are several advantages to that. But I also work internationally, pretty much worldwide, and I work virtually very, very often, often every day as well. So we do what we can do, but I always think that if we have an opportunity of seeing people and working with them as humans is always much better. I am professor and consultant in international business, and because I work internationally, I understand how we can feel now because we can't travel. All my trips, as for everyone, have been canceled, and I will still need to do what I was supposed to do virtually, and what that is not really easy. And also, what we need to understand, I think it's one of the first things we need to understand, is that the stay at home is not a choice, and that getting out is not an option. Why am I saying that? We all know that, but is when it comes to business, one thing is when you decide to work virtually. Another thing is when someone else decided that you needed to work virtually and you are not used to do that, or you are not willing to do that, and you don't know for how long you will need to do that. And this is pretty much what I wanted to talk about today, because it's something very different for the people you are working with. Today, everyone understands why we need to work virtually. But when you are able to travel and you don't, then it is much harder for the people you want to work with to understand why you are not meeting them in person. And I think that that is a very important point. Also, we just started with the stay-at-home policy. And I mean, so far so good, but after a while, we are going to get so tired of this overdose of screens. If you think about what your days are today, well, it is your computer, your phone, your tablet, your TV. You are spending much more time with screens than what you do every day, because we all work virtually every day, but we also work in person. We also go out. We also are in the office. We also talk to people in person. But this is not what we're doing now. And after a while, this starts being a little bit complicated. So it's important also to take this into account and make sure that we are clinically safe, but we are also psychologically safe. so that we don't get too stressed and there is not too much tension when we are talking to people, that we are as patient as we should be during a negotiation, mainly during such stressful times. So this was pretty much what I wanted to introduce before we get down to what is working virtually. There are several advantages in working virtually. First, it is very comfortable. Indeed, it is. You know, you work from home, you work from your office, you work anywhere, wherever you are, you can just turn on your device and work virtually. That is not an issue, and this is exactly what we're doing now. And there are so many choices in terms of software and so many devices we can use. I think that we all can agree that it saves time because we don't need to commute, because we don't need to go wherever we need to go, because we just stay where we are and we can do whatever we need to do. So it does save time. And it's also easy to attach documents, and rather than when we are working in person. So what we are doing now, you are seeing me, we are discussing at the same time, you are seeing my presentation. So this is really very, very convenient. And also the webinars, we just talked about that. I think that right now we have too many, but it is a great option at the same time, because we can keep in touch with people, we can keep learning, we can keep holding meetings, and that is a very big advantage. But there are several limitations, and unfortunately, I think that the limitations outnumber the advantages of working virtually. One of the limitations that often happen, and I don't think it's happening today, which is good news, but there are often technical problems. And these technical problems can create delays in the meeting itself. So we start late because some people have issues connecting, or some people join in late because they had technical problems. And some people just miss the meeting because they just give up, they can't connect. And that is a real issue, because if we are holding meetings, it's because they are important, right? We all have valuable time, so we are not creating meetings just to create meetings. It's important that people are there. So when they miss the meeting, how can they catch up? Well, they are going to read the paperwork and the files we can send. They can listen to the recordings. I'm sorry. But still, it is not participating in the meeting, and that is an issue. Another issue is that if you're not working in person, you are missing all the nonverbal communication. And the nonverbal communication stands for around 60% of what we say. It's just that we don't say it, but we show it. And the nonverbal is extremely important, mainly when we are working internationally. And we might see people, we just see their faces. Not everyone is expressive with their faces, but the gestures and all these ones count a lot. Also, if you are working virtually, you can't observe the surroundings. You can't see the office, you can't see the boardroom. And sometimes some objects or something, pictures, whatever, you can see in the places where people are working. And these objects or these observations you have can help you to start building relationship. They can leverage conversations, and they can help you to start the small talk. And quite honestly, we don't have small talk when we are working virtually. We tend to go straight to the point because, and mainly now, because we have several other virtual meetings coming up. So it is kind of complicated. Another very important point is to define and identify who says what and when. What does that mean? If you are the one moderating the meeting, you need to give very, very precise roles to the people who are participating in the meeting, so that everyone knows when to jump in the conversation and what to say. Otherwise, you can have plenty of people speaking at the same time, and it can be very confusing. And if you are the one just attending the meeting, you need to identify the people who's saying what as well. You know, just right now, I can't see your names, I can't see you, and I don't know who you are. And this happens very often in the meetings. So someone might ask me a question and I don't know their background and I can see them. And perhaps each one will introduce themselves when they are speaking, but will I remember that? I'm not seeing the person. It's much more complicated. And then there is not exchanging business cards at the beginning of the meeting. So these things can be complicated. But most importantly, what happens when you are holding a meeting virtually is that you don't know who's in the room on their side. You don't know who's listening to what you're saying. You don't know exactly who's connected, but mainly you don't know who's in the room. And that can be a little bit complicated on your side because you don't know exactly with how many people and with whom you are sharing your information. And that can be a little bit complicated. Time difference is also an issue because there is always someone who needs to sacrifice. You know, as I said, I work a lot with Asia, with Australia, with New Zealand, right? What does that mean? That means that when it is Friday here, it is Saturday there. Oh, will I ask them to work with me on Saturday? Or when it's Monday there, it's still Sunday here. So will I accept to work on Sundays? Or we'll just have shorter weeks and dates we can work together. We need to take that into account. When we are traveling, we are with them over there. So the time difference is not an issue. Well, jet lag, of course, but the time difference for holding the meeting is not an issue because we are there together and we have the same time. So it's not that complicated. Also, in terms of time, it is difficult because it is early morning or it is late afternoon, early evening. It is always a little bit complicated to find a time slot that is convenient to everyone. And that means that there is always someone who needs to sacrifice. Another important thing is how do you build trust? Because trust building implies human connections, and it is very hard to connect with other people virtually because we are missing the nonverbal, because we are not seeing each other, is because we are in a very cold and distant relationship. And I wouldn't say relationship, I would say pretty much interaction. And build trusting, I mean, trusting build, oh my God, trust building, sorry about that, it's not important, it is critical in negotiation. You don't trust the person, you can work with them. And it's not a matter of contract, it's a matter of people. It's a connection between people. The contract is something else. It's very important that we can trust people we want to work with, mainly if you're aiming at a long-lasting relationship. Doing that virtually is very, very complicated, mainly when we don't know each other very well still. Another important point when talking about building relationship is that people have different accents. We all speak English, but we all have different accents. And it doesn't matter if you are native speakers or not. And the thing is that when you are using any device, the accents become thicker. And sometimes it's hard to understand what people are saying. And it is hard to understand, and it is embarrassing to ask people to repeat. You can ask them to repeat once, twice, after that you are rude. And people are asking you a question and they are waiting for your answer. And you can answer because you don't understand the question. And that is also, I think, an issue that can be problematic. And more often than not, because of background noises and everything, we hold the questions until the Q&A part. And then sometimes the topic is already so different that we don't want to get back to that topic, and we just think about a question, we want to ask the question, but we can't now because we're not allowed to do it. So we hold back, and then after a while we say, well, this question doesn't make any sense now because we've been already talking about other things. And this pretty much happens when we are not in person, but it happens virtually because we just don't want to interrupt, or other people are already interrupting, and it is. With some softwares, we are not, raising hands, so it is kind of complicated. For the moderator, it's a little bit complicated because we can't see you. So sometimes people don't even raise their hand, but you see by their expression that they are kind of intrigued, or they would have asked the question, but they are not doing it. And you can just invite them to interact and ask a question. You can't do that virtually. I mean, it's not that you can't do it, but it is more complicated. And mainly because we keep it short. Virtual meetings are always shorter, or they should be shorter. Mainly because it's not that pleasant. When we are meeting in person, we are always, and we're talking about other things. We are having coffee, tea, cookies, whatever it is. A meeting is also a social event. And we lose all that when we are working virtually. Why? Because this is just not happening. You are doing whatever you are doing, and also you don't know exactly what people are doing while you are talking to them, because they are not in the same room as you. And as I said at the beginning, right now we don't even have a choice because we need to stay at home. We can't travel. But the willingness to travel is important to show to your partners, mainly when you are starting a relationship. Remember during the financial crisis in 2008, all the companies were limiting their trips because of the financial issues they had. But the companies that won something at that time were the companies that travel. Because think that you are a potential client or supplier or partner at any level, and people come to you and say, we know that times are different, difficult for everyone. We really couldn't afford this trip, but your business is so important to us that we did it anyway. And here we are to get to know you and to work with you. It changes everything. It changes all the willingness people will have to work with you. That is also why it is important to work in person. So I would say that the main takeaways of this would be that when we work virtually, we certainly have less cultural barriers. We don't need to study the culture that much. We don't need to worry about gift giving, about dress code, about participating in social gatherings, about being away from home, from the office for a long time. So that is extremely convenient. But it have one big barrier, that is technology. We can work virtually when we are aiming at short-term results, outcomes, conversations, interactions, short-term goals. Then working virtually is great. But for the long term, it is really very complicated because technology has accelerated many things, but not human relationship. And there is no long-term relationship if there is no human interaction. When we work virtually, we are in this cold, rational level of business. But we are not in that human connection and person-to-person relationship. But now, today, we don't have much choice, right? So what do we do now that we know that we can't travel? The first thing I think that is important to highlight is that we need to take it as a transitional period. It's not going to last forever. But we don't need to build our business now during the transitional period. We need just to think that we are going to do our best now, but we need already to plan what's going to happen after this period is over. We need to think about phases in our business. Right now, we better hold shorter and more frequent online meetings, because we also need to entertain the relationship we have with our partners. And long meetings can be very tricky. Already, as a principle of negotiation, you should never hold very long meetings because they are tricky. But even less when you are working virtually, because as we said before, they are tiring, they are not as pleasant as the meetings we have in person. So aim short meetings with goals that can be reached with one meeting. You need to be realistic about what you want to take out of each meeting and be humble about that. You can't expect to take too much out of an online meeting, and mainly if you keep it short. And also, if you're agreeing in anything, always leave enough room to change the terms of your agreement when you can meet in person. Then again, this is a transitional period. You can agree to agree in some terms, but you should also agree to disagree later, or to change, or to update a couple of things when you can meet in person, because this is when you can dig deeper in your topics. And if possible, postpone critical decisions, because making decisions without having really built the relationship at the level that you need, that can be pretty tricky. Also, plan trips and meetings for when it becomes possible. Tell people that you will certainly go to see them once you are allowed to do so. You can start already planning these trips without having very precise dates, but give the perspective of right now we are doing this. Everyone can understand it because we are all in the same situation, but plan to, right now we're doing this, but later when we'll be able to travel again, I'm coming over and we're going to talk about this and this and this, or I'm going to invite you here and we're going to do this and this and this. Meanwhile, entertain your relationship with your customers, with your partners, with your suppliers, because that is extremely important. The people you are already working with, it is important that you keep this relationship going. So you can do that at several levels. You can hold meetings. You can also just call them on the phone and have very, very short conversations with them, but just, friendly reminders, I'm here. So let's have a chat. Also, in terms of building relationship, during some of these calls, you can just chat, not really get down to serious business. You can talk about business, of course, but yeah, from also just talk about how's it going, how you're feeling, and what are your plans, and so forth. And you don't need to always hold meetings with everyone at the same time, but you can have specific meetings with specific people, or short calls to specific people because you want to speak about specific topics or something like that. Not saying that you need to leave people out of the loop. What I am saying is that you might want to try to establish more personal relationship, even virtually, because you can't do it in person. So this is pretty much what I wanted to say, and I didn't have any questions so far, so I'm hoping that you guys have some questions for me right now. And if you, of course, if you want to know more about negotiation, you can read my books, but I'll be more than happy to answer your questions if there are any. please feel free.
Eliane, do you mind going back to the slide before real quick? I had a question on the...
This one?
Yeah, thank you. This is Molly with the FACC-Chicago, by the way. So when you're saying for being realistic with what you want to reach at each meeting, but then leaving enough room to change terms when you can meet in person, do you have any... I know it's tough because depending on the topic of the meeting, how can you get specific but leave it vague enough to give you that wiggle room? Do you have any examples of a time when you would have done that? I mean, how do you do it if you can't really read the person's body language, and like you're saying, you don't know if you have that trust, but you also have to take a risk and say, hey, you know, let's discuss this in person more concretely down the line. Do you have any more advice on that?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Molly, for your question. When I say you should be realistic, is that don't expect to get into detailed terms of a contract, for example, or promises. Mm-hmm. You need to think about agreeing about what are we going to do together, what can we do together. So then you can plan long term, and that is not an issue. But then you need to go to take this long-term relationship step by step, and then say, okay, what can we talk about today, taking into account that we are far away from each other, that we have few minutes during this meeting. So what can we talk about that? You need to have an agenda, and the agenda is a couple of points that you can talk about. Now, you know that you can talk about that virtually, that you don't need to be with these people to talk about this topic. And you know that these are easy decisions to make or agreements to get to. You can agree on, for example, next time we are meeting, who are the people who should participate in the meeting? Should I take my lawyers, my engineers, my HR, my marketing, kind of things? It is always towards preparing our meeting in person. This is pretty much what you can do. But there are things that you can decide, you know, our collaboration. So if we are doing something that requires quantities that I will deliver to you. So what kind of, you know, products and what quantities are you thinking about right now? So it gives you already a range of quantity, deadlines, and everything. Then you can be more specific when the date gets closer, and you need to get into the terms of your contract to enforce what you've been saying virtually. This is pretty much what I meant by that. Mm-hmm. This answers your question.
It does, yeah, thank you very much. If anyone else has questions, don't hesitate to unmute your mic and ask, please.
And this is Andrea. I have a quick question. Back to an earlier point that you made, that the issue with being in turning these events into virtual meetings is that there's no exchange of business cards, and you don't know who else is in the quote unquote room with you. I wonder if there's something else that we could do as the FACC to maybe follow up with everybody and just sort of do virtual introductions, or say these are the other people who were part of this meeting and who are part of this conversation, and facilitate these post-webinar, post-virtual meeting introductions a little bit better. I mean, normally if we were doing this in our office, we would have a half an hour where everybody's just drinking coffee and meeting one another. Obviously this is different, so we're open to ideas and creative thinking on that if anyone has any.
Yeah, well, that is a very good point, and I think that you are just showing a very good illustration of what I just said. You know, as you said, when you arrive at your breakfast, we chat with people before the presentation and after the presentation, and there are business cards going, and people laughing, and people interacting, and this is not possible to do virtually. But there is one thing that you guys can try to do is that today there was a presentation, so there was a specific topic, and you are conducting these webinars. What I think are a great way of keeping in touch with your members. Perhaps you could think about putting together a meeting, just a meeting for people to get to know each other. And perhaps it should be an evening meeting, just like the after work meetings that we used to have. When it was possible. And rather than having someone presenting something, just having people meeting each other, and then we can see each other, and then we can just introduce ourselves and tell a little bit about what we do, what kind of job we have, where we are from, and then people might be able to interact, at least to know each other, and perhaps scanning the business cards so that everyone can have business cards from everyone in that meeting, or people who agree about sharing their business cards. So you can try to have a meeting that is more about networking than really a webinar. And that might work, but it will never replace the coffee and croissant and the conversations we have during the meetings, that is for sure. But of course, you need to keep, you know, entertaining your relationship with your members. That is obvious. We can't today just say, well, see you when I see you, you know, see you when we are allowed to leave home. This just can't happen. But we try to do our best to replace our real meetings, in-person meetings, by virtual options. Any other questions?
Eliane, this is Odile in Minneapolis. Bouncing back on what you just brought up, how do you suggest we implement this with, you know, a team at work? Usually when within a company you have the lunch break, or, you know, you bump into someone at the coffee machine or something. But during lunchtime, you can have conversations that usually, you know, open new topics or reveal new information and so forth. How do you suggest that companies, and large companies especially, can interact with their teams and keep motivating their teams virtually?
Well, you can't oblige people to have informal conversations when you are formalizing the situation. This is just not going to happen. And when you think about the French companies, most of the information is informal, and it is during lunchtime, and it is during a coffee break. And it is informal because people choose who they want to talk with and what kind of information they want to convey to these people. No, you can't formalize that. That just can't happen. But what we can do is more informal meetings between the managers and their teams to talk about things perhaps without an agenda. It's just meeting, a kind of let's get together. So how are you guys doing? Have you been in touch with, I don't know, your clients or whoever they are working with? And are there any issues? Are there any questions? Would you like to share any questions or information or any concerns? Those kind of things are possible to be done. But if people don't want to disclose, they are not going to disclose, mainly virtually, mainly in a meeting, mainly without knowing if this is being recorded or not. You can't expect informal in a formal situation.
Yeah.
I hope that that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely, Elaine. I think we are all on a learning curve, and thinking that this may be longer term, really thinking also, how do you keep everyone motivated? There is the newness, but then, you know, after a while, attitudes change, and yeah, it's
Yes and no. I would say that in some cultures it's much harder to work virtually than in other cultures. France is an example of that. You got to see the people. You got to talk to people. You got to have a coffee with people. It's a little bit more complicated. But you don't know what's happening in the background, and people in the teams might or might not be motivated, but they are still interacting with the people they want to interact.
mm-hmm.
They are speaking on the phone. They are still sharing information with the people they want to share information with. Oh, they are not totally disconnected. I wouldn't believe that. I think that when they are part of a team and there is relationship in that team, they keep the relationship going. Their managers might not know that, but they do. They definitely do. Because if they do that, they go crazy. It is, after all, their job. It is, after all, their team. So they keep in touch. But they pick the people they want to be in touch with. That is for sure. In informal situations, I mean. So they are still doing it virtually. It's just that it is not big meetings. It is not meetings that are set up by the hierarchy. It is informal. And then again.
Yeah.
Are there any more questions? If not, a big thank you to Eliane for our conversation this morning. This is definitely very thought-provoking, and we'll take all this information to heart and to consideration over the next few weeks. And we do hope that next time we see each other, it will be in person. Please, Eliane, if you don't mind, what we'll probably do is send a follow-up email to everybody who participated and include your contact information. Yep. So that if there are any further questions or follow-ups that people can, who participated, can contact you directly.
Of course, that would be great. Thank you very much for letting me talk about this.
And anybody who's participating, if you have any ideas of other topics or presentations that we could be doing, please don't hesitate to email me and Molly, and we'll get back to you right away. Thanks everybody, and have a good day and a good week.
Thank you, Elaine, and thank you, FACC team.
Thanks Odile. À bientôt.
Bientôt.
Hello.
Thank you.